Ah, holidays. Those magical times of the year where we eat too much, pretend to enjoy our families, and commemorate events that, let's be honest, most of us only vaguely remember from high school history class. We gather around tables laden with food, share stories, and sometimes, if we're lucky, we even learn a thing or two about the significance of the day we're celebrating. And speaking of vaguely remembered history, buckle up, buttercups, because today, we're diving headfirst into the murky, often overlooked depths of Youth Day in South Africa. This day isn't just another excuse for a public holiday, it marks a pivotal moment in the nation's struggle against apartheid, a time when the youth stood up and said, "Enough is enough." Now I know what you're thinking, Youth Day sounds delightful, like a bouncy castle filled with rainbows and free candy. A day where kids can just be kids, right? Well, not quite. Well, my friends, as with most things in life, the truth is a tad more complicated, and about 1,000 shades darker. Beneath the surface of this seemingly cheerful celebration lies a history filled with struggle, pain, and a fight for justice that many paid the ultimate price for. So, grab your metaphorical shovels and let's dig into the top 10 shocking facts about Youth Day that they definitely didn't cover in your textbooks. From the brave students who led the protests to the harsh realities they faced, we're about to uncover the real story behind this important day. So, picture this. It's 1976, disco is all the rage, bell-bottoms are in fashion, and the world is grooving to the beats of the Bee Gees. Meanwhile, in South Africa, the country is still firmly in the grip of apartheid, a system so openly racist, it makes modern-day microaggressions look like love letters. The segregation is palpable, and the tension is thick in the air. Against this backdrop of delightful social harmony, the government decides, hey, let's force all these black students to learn in Afrikaans, because, nothing says we care about your education like imposing a foreign language. Now, for those of you lucky enough to be unfamiliar with the dulcet tones of Afrikaans, imagine a language birthed from a drunken liaison between Dutch and a particularly grumpy German dialect. It's not exactly the language of liberation, is it? More like the language of oppression. Naturally, the students weren't thrilled. They were frustrated, angry, and felt their rights were being trampled on. So they decided to voice their discontent. And by voice, I mean they organized a massive protest. Thousands of students took to the streets chanting and holding signs demanding the right to be educated in their own languages. But instead of being met with understanding or even a dialogue, they were met with live ammunition from the police. The authorities didn't just want to silence them, they wanted to crush their spirit. What started as a peaceful demonstration for basic human rights quickly devolved into, well, a bloodbath. The streets of Soweto were stained with the blood of young students who dared to dream of a better future. This tragic event would go down in history as the Soweto Uprising, a stark reminder of the brutal lengths to which the apartheid regime would go to maintain its oppressive rule. Now you might be tempted to think, surely the government didn't anticipate this level of, shall we say, pushback, and you, my friend, would be giving them far too much credit. The apartheid government, with the foresight of a goldfish in a microwave, seemed genuinely surprised when their brilliant plan to quell dissent with bullets backfired spectacularly. It's almost as if they thought, if we just ignore the systemic inequalities and brutalize anyone who complains, everything will magically sort itself out. Spoiler alert, it didn't. In their defense, governing through a haze of casual racism and delusion probably doesn't leave much room for nuanced thinking. Now you might think that the sight of children being gunned down in the streets for wanting a decent education would have sparked international outrage, right? The sheer brutality of it, the innocence of the victims, surely it would have moved the hearts of people around the globe. Well, you'd be right, eventually. But the initial reaction was far from what one would expect in such a dire situation. Initially, the response from the global community could best be described as tepid. It was as if the world was watching a distant, unimportant event unfold. It was like the world collectively shrugged and went, ah, South Africa, the same old story, nothing new to see here. Those wacky racists are at it again, pass the crisps. The level of indifference was almost surreal. Some countries mumbled about sanctions as if they were discussing the weather. Others issued strongly worded letters that probably got lost in the mail. These letters were more about maintaining appearances than taking real action. It took the body count reaching truly staggering numbers before anyone actually decided to do something about it. The world needed a wake-up call, and unfortunately, it came at a great cost. It's a bit like realizing you've left the stove on after your house is already burned down. The realization comes too late to prevent the disaster. Sure, you're aware of the problem now and the urgency is finally understood. But the damage is, shall we say, done. The consequences of delayed action are irreversible and the world is left to deal with the aftermath. So what happens when you take a generation of young people, expose them to unimaginable violence, and then tell them to just get on with their lives? Well, if you guessed deep-seated trauma and a healthy dose of distrust in authority, give yourself a gold star. The psychological scars left by the Soweto Uprising run deep. Many of those who witnessed the horrors firsthand carried the weight of that day with them for the rest of their lives. Imagine trying to focus on algebra when you've seen your classmates gunned down for demanding the right to learn. It's a lot to process, even without the added pressure of dismantling a racist regime. Now, in the aftermath of the Soweto Uprising, the government, in a shocking display of something vaguely resembling a conscience, decided to make some changes to their educational policies. And by changes, I mean they swapped out the blatantly racist textbook for the slightly less blatantly racist edition. They also eased up on the whole everyone must learn in Afrikaans thing, which, let's be honest, was probably for the best. Of course, these changes were more akin to putting a band-aid on a gaping wound, but hey, baby steps, right? Now you might be wondering, how did the media handle all of this? Well, imagine a news cycle curated by a bunch of ostriches with their heads firmly buried in the sand, and you're halfway there. The South African media, under the watchful eye of the government censors, did their best to downplay the events of the Soweto Uprising. Headlines screamed about isolated incidents and agitators, while conveniently forgetting to mention the whole children being shot thing. It was a masterclass in propaganda, proving that sometimes the most effective way to control a narrative is to simply pretend it isn't happening. But amidst the chaos and brutality, something remarkable emerged: the power of music and culture. Because when you're fighting for your right to exist, a catchy protest song can be more powerful than any weapon. Music became a lifeline for the oppressed, a way to express their anger, their sorrow, and their unwavering hope for a better future. From the haunting melodies of struggle songs to the defiant rhythms of protest anthems, music gave voice to a generation yearning for freedom. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit, much like a well-tuned guitar solo, can soar above the noise. Now, the road to dismantling apartheid was long and arduous, paved with countless acts of courage, sacrifice, and let's be honest, a fair bit of international pressure. But slowly, like a glacier carving its way through a mountain of prejudice, things began to change. The Soweto Uprising, for all its tragedy, proved to be a turning point. It showed the world the brutality of the apartheid regime and ignited a global movement for change. And while the architects of apartheid clung to power with the tenacity of a particularly stubborn barnacle, the tide had turned. So, here we are in the present day, where Youth Day is commemorated with speeches, marches, and the occasional awkward school play. It's a far cry from the blood-soaked streets of 1976, which, let's be honest, is probably for the best. But while we celebrate the bravery of those who fought for a better future, it's important to remember that the fight for equality is far from over. Systemic racism, poverty, and inequality still plague South Africa. A stark reminder that freedom, much like a gym membership, requires constant effort to maintain. So, what does Youth Day mean for young South Africans today? Well, imagine inheriting a house that's been partially renovated after a major fire. Sure, it's structurally sound, but there are still scorch marks on the walls and a faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. The legacy of apartheid casts a long shadow, and while progress has been made, the fight for true equality continues. Today's youth face an entirely new set of challenges: unemployment, poverty, and the ever-present threat of violence. But they also inherit the spirit of resistance, the unwavering belief that a better world is possible. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth fighting for. So, there you have it, a crash course in the not-so-sunny side of Youth Day. We've explored the tragic origins, the government's questionable decision-making skills, and the long-lasting impact on generations of South Africans. It's a sobering reminder that freedom isn't free, and historical amnesia is a luxury we can ill afford. Remember, those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it, or at the very least, are destined to make terrible history-themed memes. So, go forth, educate yourselves, and never stop questioning the narratives you're fed. And hey, if you enjoyed this descent into the heart of darkness, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more delightfully depressing content.